Hello, my name is Ali, and my senior project was building a video game, which turned out to be a massive undertaking. But here is my journey. When I thought about what I wanted to do for my senior project, I wanted to try to do something that I never got a chance to do at NJIT. And the last sort of thing that I could come up with was a video game. Thanks to some of the courses that I took, I felt confident that I'd be able to take a shot at it, but I had no idea what I was in store for. How would I do it? Like, what kind of video game would it be? What was my story? I needed to think about something that I wanted to tell. I created a poem, and it was called Spiral Seashell. And in that poem, it was sort of like my struggle with memory. Having ADHD, it's really hard for me to remember things that happen. And this was a moment where I experienced a near death experience and I created a really riveting poem, but it kind of just ended there. I knew that I wanted to tell this story because when I thought about the poem as I was making it, I realized, like, well, I can't actually show this. And being that the story took place exclusively in my past, I had no way of recreating it. And so I opted to go for a soundscape. With the advent of me creating a video game, I now had a new opportunity to revisit that story.
I carry with me the crushed remains of seashells, brittle shards clanking together in my bag. Sometimes I hear their chimes, but mostly they go unnoticed. Sometimes I even forget them. That is, until I rummage through my bag and get jabbed by an edge. At this point, they've been reduced to just dust and crumbled pieces. Their former glory was much more noteworthy. Scavenged from all over, stolen from their sandy homes. 3 are black, 5 are white, 2 are blue, 1 is red, and 1 is spiraled. Most are chipped, but a few are pristine. Out of all of them, I'd say the spiraled one is my favorite. It's only the size of a quarter, but it's my ear to the ocean. I hear the waves crashing, the people laughing, the music playing, the seagulls singing, the lifeguards whistling, the families shouting, the ATVs speeding, my hands flailing, my feet splashing, the sound fading, my breath grasping, my mind praying. The ocean is silent when you're beneath it. I remember the distinct feeling of the red sand. It was plush and squishy, somewhere between plastic and rubbery. It was unusually cold compared to the warmth of the soothing sand I'm used to. Was I on the ground?
You're gonna be okay.
No. I was being carried. The sun was clouded, but I don't remember it being overcasted that day. There was a teenager hovering next to me, but I don't remember his name.
Stay calm.
I don't remember hearing much either. Water must have clogged my ears. I do remember one thing, though. The shaky laugh my cousin gave me after celebrating me making it back. His face carried more than a smile in that moment. We carried our belongings back to the car. We didn't bring much, just some towels and a speaker. I had a sandwich in my bag, but my appetite had washed away. We sat there for a few minutes, not saying much. I don't remember many details about the drive back, other than it being quiet. Subconsciously, I think I was drowning out the noise of them trying to cheer me up. I sat there and just blankly stared at the water as we left, bewildered at the beast that nearly swallowed me. It took me a long time to get myself to go back there. Twice a week turned into a 730-day gap. The first time I went back was for a job in Point Pleasant. It had garage-style doors, the kind that give you the closest view from afar. It wasn't until a few months after, when me and my coworkers decided to go to the water after a shift, that my feet even felt the ocean. Every time thereafter, I made sure to grab a shell. Trips turned journeys, usually accompanied by friends or
Hey,
cousins.
what's up, man?
We'd meet up and spend a few hours skimboarding, but mostly just spending time together. For lunch, we'd bring ShopRite roast beef sandwiches, or sometimes I'd treat him out to nuggets at McDonald's.
Hey, gimme.
We would try to take videos of each other and see who caught the best wave.
Yo, nice one.
Time is a funny thing, you know? You have all of it in the world,
Guys?
till you don't.
Hello?
Being alone makes time stand still. Facing fears can really make you feel small, and the gravity of the ocean makes me feel minuscule. I carry my brand new 7-foot Wave Bandit soft top surfboard in my trunk, 2 years old, untouched, and yearning for the ocean. A reminder of the dream that was stolen from me. My friends accompanying me usually pulls my mind into focus, but now, as I stand here, my thoughts consume me. And so I go. I'm wearing my wetsuit. It's more snug than I remember. This board still has the tags on it. I never did get to use it that summer. I ripped them off like band-aids on scraped knees and ran, head first, screaming, alone. No friends to distract me, no beachgoers to throw a football to, no barbecue to cook food in, no blanket to sit on, no music to soothe me, no lifeguards to protect me, no sun to greet me, not even seagulls showed up that day. Just gray and quiet. Knee-deep sinks to chest-deep in an instant, as I recall the hours and hours of YouTube videos I studied to prepare for this situation. I jump and thrust my body forward, snatch the board under me, and clutch, holding on until... Wait, it carries me effortlessly. Huh. Okay. Breathe. Don't panic. I can do this. Waves pummel into me. Is Poseidon pissed or something? I punch through them, partly angry, partly because I don't know what else to do. 20 long paddles in, 3 punches through waves, 2 miraculous duck dives, and suddenly the ocean goes quiet. Except this time, I'm sitting above the water. I didn't catch any waves that day, but that day I was victorious. And as I left, I spotted it. A treasure in the sand. My spiral seashell.
But that's the story. Now I got to figure out how to build a video game. Checking YouTube and checking tutorial forums. These are all of the videos that I watched, and honestly, this isn't even half of it. This is probably like 1/6 of all the videos that I watched. If you want to look, this is just a recording of my search history on YouTube. Photoshop, ocean tutorials, platformer movement, starter assets, like so after seeing all of the videos, I landed on Unreal Engine 5. Unreal Engine 5 is it's just a really powerful engine. And most of the video games that are out there that are AAA standard games, they are made in Unreal Engine 5. And so I kind of thought that it would be a good starting place. But it's very difficult to get started in Unreal Engine 5 if you don't know anything about building a game. There's so much more functionality, but with that functionality, if you don't know what you're doing, it's very easy to get lost. Ultimately, I decided that the style of 3D movement in a video game space with like realistic texturing, um, it just wasn't really what I had in mind for the video game that I wanted to create. So I ended up switching over. But Fortnite and Unreal Engine created something called Unreal Editor for Fortnite, which is I guess, combination of utilizing Fortnite's assets and stylized game textures, utilizing their stuff and Unreal Editor, which it was sort of the creative look that I was thinking was a good idea. But the thing is that this game would ultimately just look like a Fortnite clone, and that's not the kind of game that I wanted to put out. And also, this software is brand new. Like it came out, I think, in March. The amount of guides and YouTube tutorials were very limited. It's really made for somebody who has extensive experience in Unreal Engine, but because I don't have that, ultimately decided that it wasn't sustainable for me. So I needed to shift in focus. Both Unreal Engine and UEFN for Fortnite were 3D styled games. That's where I decided maybe Twine would be a good idea. But Twine would be a game that relies heavily on dialogue and decision based gameplay, which for my specific story I knew probably wouldn't work because I'm not going to be interacting with other people. So I didn't really think that Twine was the best utilization of that. And so I decided that maybe I would be best off trying it in Unity. Unity is the kind of platform that you want to use if you're building a like creative style game that's not necessarily based in realism. But one of the first things that I wanted to do was create an awesome looking character. It had to be reminiscent of paper because I want the story to be like sort of like tearing out pages in a notebook, kind of like burning pages away, maybe like this sort of like fading in, fading out of memories. I wanted to play with the visual representation of the game. So I created his coloring to be mostly grayscale, but the only color that you see in him is his teal eyes, blonde hair, teal belt. But the premise for this was sort of a like time traveling wanderer, and he's going to be uncovering his lost memories. So this is sort of the design evolution. It started out as a simple pixel sprite where I wanted his figure to be ambiguous but still have visual intrigue. When I went over to RPG Maker, I had to recreate him in this style, and this is sort of what I ended up with after scrapping this design. And I was really happy with this guy. The blonde hair, the little belt. And so all of this was hand drawn in Photoshop, and the effects for the animations were layered and then animated. You can kind of see him moving. This is his breathing animation. After placing the images, you can sort of place them into that animation window, and you can create something called a sprite sheet. So you need to create animation files via these sprite sheets. So here you see I created his walking animation. This is just me placing his figure, moving his legs, and then placing the next figure, moving him, placing, and a whole bunch of moving and placing. After I had generated all the images, it was just a matter of lining them up. And then after I lined them up, I just wrote some code that allowed me to basically generate this, which is a sprite sheet. It just shows every frame of the animation one by one. This is just an example of the animation of him walking. But the only thing is that in a 2D side scroller, you're not just moving in one direction, you're moving in both directions. So I had to like replace all the animations, rearrange, and then resize, which took a while, but that's just so that way I can get him to walk both left and right. I've been talking about Unity this whole time. I don't even have it downloaded yet. And if you know anything about, these platforms, that they have so many different versions and each version does something different. So I had to like figure out which one to download. There was a whole bunch of them, but eventually I got it. But, it's not as easy as some of the the other game engines. You really have to just start from scratch. And so I had to learn how to code. So I never touched C sharp. So I had to learn a whole new coding language. But this code right here was the code that I used after I had dropped in my player model into Unity. This was the code that gave him physics. So my character, after importing the asset of the character and creating the code for his physics, it's now recognizable by Unity. But let me start designing the game. I wanted to create a game that was a side scroller game where the player just walks along the path. The story unveils as the character crosses amongst triggerable action segments. The character is going to walk from left to right. As he steps on an invisible trigger, things will occur, and that's going to just sort of be the basis of the game. And this was sort of my scene development. This was me playing with a beach scene. I ended up scrapping this scene because I had already done a forest scene, but effectively this is the process. So you have a whole bunch of PNGs that you make, and then you remove the backgrounds. But what ends up happening is you sort of just layer together a image that's a PNG that has movable parts, and that movable parts is sort of the crux of how you build a 2D platformer game. So you need to animate all of these individual pieces, and to do that, it's called a parallax. But it moves the individual layers, so the shrubs, the grass, the sand, all that. And then so you get like a depth effect. After I put that into Unity though, I was met with a bunch of errors. It didn't work. So it looked like I wasted a bunch of time. I couldn't build the first level of my game. And if I can't build the first level, then I definitely can't build a game. So I was super bummed out, and time was running out. So I needed to figure out what to do. Let me just pivot to RPG Maker. I know RPG Maker wasn't my first choice, but I knew RPG Maker was a plug-and-play kind of easy way to build a game. Even though the art style wasn't what I wanted to go for, and it definitely looks different, I thought maybe I can make it work. I ended up building this little beach scene here, but after like creating a little game where I created my own startup sheet, this game is just not at all what I wanted to create. Ultimately, I ended up deciding that because everything upon the screen is visible, it won't really suit my game well where I want to drop in items and take them away and create a narrative through the objects of the game that are appearing and disappearing. So I had to go back to Unity, except this time I was not taking no for an answer. But at first I thought, well, since 2D didn't work before, maybe I'll try doing 3D. It's definitely not the direction that I wanted to go in, but I needed to figure out how to understand movement mechanics. While creating a 3D landscape wasn't too difficult, it isn't exactly what I wanted to go for, but it did teach me some valuable information that ended up translating over to my 2D game later on. Here's me creating just a really basic landscape, and then I imported a sample model, and so I was able to play the game in 3D, and he was not falling through the world, which was great. But after examining why this was able to work, I was able to take the knowledge of him walking on the terrain and then apply that to my 2D sprites. So using the 3D sample model, I rearranged my player scripts, and then bam! I was able to get my player to do the same thing. Even though he's 2D and design is really ugly, this is the farthest I've ever gotten to where he's not falling through the world constantly. And there is a world there, so that my player's feet recognizes there's a world, and it was great. I was just so happy. So the way I did that was with things called 2D colliders, and so I started importing the PNGs that I was creating before, the forest PNG specifically. And in doing that, I imported them one by one, and then started to parallax them. But before I parallaxed them, before I added animations, I just wanted to try figuring out how to get this in here instead of it being in the front. We're gonna put this to the back. Okay, and then we're gonna bring our guy, and that's just me like working through it. And then you see, but I want this part to be on in front of him.
I think that looks good though.
So if I go, you can see like I'm thinking through. Okay, I have my guy here now, but I need to create some layers here. I want the player to interact with those layers. I don't want him to just be a flat figure moving along a space. And so through more adjusting, I now have the layers interacting with the guy. Like now, like things that are in front of him, you can see.
Cool.
They're in front of him. Interacted with by the landscape. And so to fix the static background, you need to code. So back to the C# Visual Studio coding script, because I had to figure out how to set those PNGs to have a move value relative to the player camera. Then I had to start adding the animations. You just need to select your player and then import one by one the frames. And so instead of him moving static, he now moves with a walk. Like that. I wanted his default to be the breathing that I made earlier, and then if he presses the right arrow key or the D key, the WASD, the D key, he'll move to the right, and then the A key or the left arrow key, he'll move to the left. Before I finished his animation work, I wanted to start figuring out what I wanted to do with the game objects that I talked about earlier. I needed something to kick off the story. There is a backpack that I talked about in the very beginning of the soundscape, the bag that holds my seashells, the bag that you hear audibly plop down. This is sort of my bag. But I didn't want the bag to just be a static image, of course, so I wanted it to animate upon entering its vicinity. And I did this through drawing it out in Photoshop and letting it come to life, really. Here is the pickup animation, which isn't technically a pickup animation. It's more like a dissolve animation, because he doesn't actually own the backpack or have the backpack. The backpack is just a figment of his imagination or a memory. And so that's more so the idea behind this. I didn't want the backpack to feel tangible. I wanted it to feel like it was a figment of his imagination. And so that's why it's sort of like fading into thin air. And here's what the animation looks like in real time. But aside from the backpack, though, I thought about a title card and what that might look like. I wanted something in the vein of a dreamscape or a like foggy, hazy memory. And so utilizing smoke texturing and transparent backgrounds, I was able to create this sort of sprite sheet here. But it wasn't until after I figured out how to utilize After Effects, which I had never used before, to figure out how to map the smoke to reveal the text. And you do that through a wipe reveal and masking a box. After that, though, I uploaded this file into Premiere Pro. Through Premiere Pro, I removed the background, which then created a .mov file. Uploaded the .mov file into Photoshop to then create this sprite sheet you see here. Reason why I didn't just upload the MOV file as a transparent background video into Unity is because apparently Unity doesn't accept transparent background video files. So, to drag and drop all of those new things in there, the title card and the backpack, I needed to create an interactable object system that allows me to utilize triggers, spawners, and colliders. This is a lot of information and it's really, really complicated, but essentially, create an object and you give it this collider function. The object can have a function as opposed to just sitting static in a scene. Once it has that function, you can then spawn that function through the use of a trigger and a spawner. The trigger is what allows your player to activate the spawner. So then with an interactable script, this is how I was able to dissolve the backpack through a keystroke. So if you're in range, you can have an input. And if you're actively pressing an input, which is the interact key that I chose to be E, then you're invoking the action, which is to dissolve. But I'm almost done. I have my level, I have my player model, I have a game object in the form of a backpack, triggers and spawners to both spawn the backpack, pick it up, and then have it dissolve. The storyline to build off of. It's time for just a little bit of post-processing to really just spice everything up. Tone mapping, a little bit of vignetting, bloom, which you'll see in a second, makes it look nice and bright. So here's it without anything. But then once I start turning on, like, this is the tone mapping. The tone mapping basically just takes the contrast, takes the colors, bumps it up, makes it look really HD. It enables HDR, high dynamic range. With a little bit of vignette though, now you're starting to get this sort of moody background. The bloom is just so that way anything that creates light, the light shines a little bit brighter, and then it transfers to the surrounding pixels. Now it looks a little bit more bright. And then suddenly we're getting a pretty moody kind of game where I just did some spot coloring, took the hue and saturation, dropped it all the way down to grayscale, but I just isolated the teal color. And that's only within this green box. So the game starts in this section, transitions over to this section that will have a completely different look than the first section. You can see with a little bit of chromatic aberration, it's going to look really, really cool. I included my audio stuff, so I wanted to put ambient background noise, the story audio, and that would come out via the triggers. But after all of that hard work, my game is now finally ready to be played. It took me a long time. This is the opening scene of Spiral by yours truly.
I carry with me the crushed remains of seashells, brittle shards clanking together in my bag. Sometimes I hear their chimes, but mostly they go unnoticed. Sometimes I even forget them. That is, until I rummage through my bag and get jabbed by